In a world where we as consumers can have whatever we want, whenever we want it with a couple of taps on a piece of glass, accessing product is no longer the consumer's primary problem. The scarcer commodity in today's retail market, however, is well-produced, well-written, and entertaining content. All things that have powered my next guest's business from its beginnings as a blog about watches in 2008 to becoming a global retail powerhouse in the wristwatch market today. A member of the Forbes 40 Under 40 list, Ben Clymer is the founder and executive chairman of HODINKEE, recipient of Fast Company's award for Most Innovative Companies for the year 2019, and considered the leading voice in the watch industry. A reputation HODINKEE has earned one beautifully crafted piece of content at a time. Ben joined me recently from his place in upstate New York to talk about that journey and why all brands need to start thinking like editorial brands. Ben, thanks for joining me. I'm so glad to have you here today.
It is truly my pleasure, and I mean that with the utmost sincerity.
Well, thank you so much. But before we go much further, I just need to tell you that in some respects, I have to hold you a little bit responsible. Because I think it was around 2012, I started sort of waking up to the idea that as an adult, I should probably own and wear a watch instead of just relying on my phone like so many of us do. And so I started sort of exploring this whole realm of horology and timepieces. And it was actually a piece of content with you and John Mayer in 2013. In what I think was the inaugural episode of Talking Watches, that's what took me down the rabbit hole. And ever since that time, I've basically been working only to buy watches. So just so you're aware.
I was saying earlier, I have nothing to do but apologize to you for that. I mean, I am so sorry for that. I know how costly it can be emotionally with relationships, et cetera. I have nothing but regret for turning you onto this world, for sure.
I appreciate that. So once I started to get to know HODINKEE and I started to sort of look at the backstory of where it and you came from, it really is a truly remarkable and inspiring story. So in 2008, you're working in the financial sector. And then 5 years later, you're sitting in the Little Prince restaurant in New York City with John Mayer talking about his favorite timepieces. Can you fill in those 5 years for me?
Sure. I mean, those are probably the most exciting five years of my life, I would say. I mean, even more so now. The company is obviously much bigger and kind of doing cooler stuff now. But I mean, back then, I think it's important to note: I don't come from a world where like luxury things really existed. Both my parents were teachers. I'm from Rochester, New York, which is like, it is closer to Canada than it is New York City. So, really different world. And I think it's because of that is why HODINKEE really worked. But in those few years, so I was working in the financial industry in 2008. I'm sure some of you will remember Lehman Brothers collapsed. I was working at a competing bank at that time. It was really just chaos in the financial industry. And I didn't really enjoy being there to begin with anyway. But, I was 25 years old and they offered me a salary of like, $96,000 a year, which at 25 is just like, it's absurd. I mean, it's absurd for even today. And a bonus and all this crazy stuff. And again, coming from a really, really, modest, middle-class upbringing, like this was more money than probably either of my parents had ever made in their lifetime. And I was making it at 25. And it's so easy to get kind of caught up in that. And so many have, obviously. And so, but by luck or not, the financial crisis hit in 2008, 2009. And my boss at the time said, hey, there will be layoffs. We don't know when it's really going to happen. So just kind of come in and bide your time and don't get in trouble. So I did that. I started writing. I always loved to write, but never really kind of figured out how I would become a writer. I started writing about the one nice watch that I owned, which was an Omega Speedmaster that my maternal grandfather had given me. And he was my hero. I mean, really somebody that I identified with more in some ways than even my parents. He had nice things and was an entrepreneur and was just kind of a cool guy. And so he gave me this watch when I was 16. I started researching that Omega. and then writing about it on Tumblr and then Squarespace and these kind of early blogging platforms. And then lo and behold, people started coming to the site. And I remember the first day we had 100 people, and then the first day we had 1,000 people, then the first day we had 100,000 people on the site. And then I started freelancing for GQ, for Esquire, for the Financial Times, How to Spend It, Forbes, those types of places. And really all I wanted to do was get into a good journalism program. And I live in New York, and so kind of the programs are really NYU and Columbia. I only applied to Columbia and somehow got in. I think that they're still kind of regretting that to this day. But it's one of those things where I was so excited to go to this program that I had really long aspired to be a part of. Never really thought it would happen because I wasn't a journalist. I wasn't a writer. I mean, I got into that journalism program based on a blog about watches, effectively. I mean, not effectively, literally. And which was pretty wild, even in hindsight. So went through the journalism program, met some fascinating people, some of which are still, one of which actually still works at HODINKEE. A few others are still close friends. And then when it came time to look for a job, upon graduation, a lot of my classmates were looking at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the normal places for what they call a desk job, like the finance desk, politics, whatever. Mm-hmm. Those jobs barely existed back then. And this was 2012, 11-ish. And so, think about where they are now. They truly don't exist. In fact, everybody's really a freelancer. And at the time, HODINKEE was already kind of doing okay. I was making a few $1,000s per month on passive income as advertising revenue. And what I really started to realize is that this thing really had legs, and we started to get more and more attention from bigger sites like the Forbes and the Robb Reports and the GQs and the kind of mainstream lifestyle folks. The New York Times didn't write about me in 2010 or 11, but I was featured in a story about watches back then, which was kind of crazy. My picture was in the New York Times. And so when it came down to all right, am I going to be a reporter or am I going to be an entrepreneur? The choice was really easy for me. And I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so when I graduated, I hired my first employee, who's still with the company. And kind of went off to the races. And then, it really started to take off in around 2012, 2013, when I could dedicate full time to it. I was doing it full time while going to journalism school. And people really started to get into it. And one of the first things we did that I really started to recognize as real potential was e-commerce. And this was 2012. So immediately after, maybe just before I graduated from Columbia, I had designed some leather straps for my vintage Rolex watch. And instead of buying one just for me, I had ordered 25 or 30 of them. And I just put them up on a Shopify, page. And, we published them, and GQ and Esquire and Hypebeast and all these big men's sites started linking back to it. We sold out in the first hour, and I was like, oh boy, this is a real thing. And, it was, again, we probably made, $800 or, a few $1,000, nothing crazy at all. But it proved, exactly, it validated that our audience was transactional. And it was actually from that launch that John Mayer reached out, who's now an investor and a friend. He reached out and said, hey, love what you're doing, would love to get involved. And we hopped on the phone, and he's just like, this is kind of what the watch world has been waiting for. A young, seemingly normal person that is focused less on the cost of things and more on the craft of things. And I think that was a huge differentiator back then, where the Robb Report, who's still very much around, it's hyper opulent luxury, luxury for luxury's sake. Whereas the folks that read our site aren't into the cost is part of the story, of course, but it's really about the craft. And I think, from that moment, John and I became friends. And then one day he was in town to do Letterman or something. And he's like, hey, if you can grab a video guy, which we had at the time, somebody that I met at Columbia, meet me at this cafe. We'll shoot a little thing on my watch collection. And that was it. And that was kind of internet magic, so to speak. And that video that you mentioned, has turned on millions of people to the watch world, for sure.
These are little chambers for our curiosity and the thought energy we have. I have thousands of thoughts a day, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands. And this is a place to put all that energy that can create this harmonious feeling in your life. For me, you get to pick which watch to put on. Doesn't have to be an AP concept, but if you've got your dress one and your sport one and the one that made your stomach hurt when you bought it, no matter what bracket it was in, you've got a collection,
It seems to me that, two of the things I guess most retailers struggle at all times to sort of communicate to their customer segments is trust, number one, and authority, number two. When we tell you that this is what you should buy, that you take that seriously. And a lot of companies attempt to do that. They attempt to sort of establish those two things through advertising,
Right.
whereas you've established it through deep editorial and a clear, deep understanding of the category. Is that, do you see that as being sort of a call out to other retailers that spend maybe less on advertising and more on content?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen it. We've seen it in many places, but certainly in the watch world, it is, as you said, it creates a connection to the consumer that is based on knowledge instead of money. And so, if you look at myself and our group of editors, like, we're really the 1927 Yankees of watch editors, at least in the English-speaking world. These are the superstars, and I've done it, and Jack and Cara and people on our team, like, they get stopped for selfies on the street, and I've signed autographs, which is absurd, but it's because we explain things in a way that is welcoming and friendly. And again, like, we've created a different type of credential that is not financial. So instead of saying, hey, person X has $10 million, therefore he can buy a very expensive, whatever, Patek, we say, you know what, like, that's cool, but anybody with $10 million can do that. Like,
exactly.
Let's go find the thing that that guy doesn't know about, has never heard of. And I think that is what allowed us to become so much more ingrained into the watch collector's kind of psyche, because we are discovering things for them, we're discovering things for ourselves. And it feels like we're on this journey together, as opposed to us just pitching stuff at them all the time.
Yeah, for sure. Now, for those in the audience that don't know, you did just have a pretty significant round of fundraising, almost $40 million raised, if I'm not mistaken. And you have now acquired Crown and Caliber, major marketplace of pre-owned, right? I think.
Correct.
Yeah. So we can expect, obviously, a greater volume of wristwatch sales. I guess my question is, can we also now expect you to sort of ramp up the content production to go along with that?
Definitely. I mean, I think, your piece about us, really kind of touched on why this is so important. And I think, there was a Wall Street Journal story written about our fundraising in December that was I think, one of the better stories written about us, and that it was accurate. And, the goal here is to hire more editors and create more content, because that is what drives everything. And I think, it's content, it's community, which is a big part of what we do, and certainly commerce. But without the content, I mean, again, I can tell you exactly how much money HODINKEE spent on marketing last year, and that was exactly $0. We don't spend $1 on it. And, last year our shop did more than $20 million in new watch sales.
Yeah.
And the reason we're able to do that is because our editors are, they're not marketers, and nothing is done strategically at all, but, like, that's our funnel. That is exactly what brings people into the site, and they say, oh, wait a minute, like, Jack Forrester is quite literally the man who wrote the book on Cartier, which he actually did. And so if you have a vintage Cartier in the shop, it seems like this would be the place to buy it. Or Cara Barrett wrote a story on women's watches. If you have ladies' Bulgari watches in the shop, like, that's probably a good place to buy it. And, we also do a really good job, if I may say, of editing out things for the shop. And I think that was another thing where, instead of just kind of dumping everything from all these big brands online, we say, you know what, like, here are the 7 out of 150 SKUs that, like, we would actually buy ourselves, and we put those up there.
Right. So it's curation as well. You could add that to the content, community, and curation element as well. Ben, sincerely, thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for being a part of this. And I certainly hope we can keep talking in the future. It's wonderful.
Would love that. Thanks so much.
Thank you.